Many of the horrors in 40 days of the Russian invasion of Ukraine have been off camera. Claims, counterclaims, word of mouth. But that has completely changed in the town of Bucha on the outskirts of Kyiv. It's a suburb of Ukraine's capital. Civilian bodies lying on the streets, mass graves discovered, families killed, children missing. Images from the town of Bucha have stunned the world. And India Today's Gaurav Sawant and video journalist Lalit Joshi are there in Bucha as we speak. And they've been sending us one horrific ground report after another about what really happened. Take a look at what they saw with their own eyes.
We are currently inside Bucha, and the destruction that you see all around during the Russian occupation of this place is visible for all. Burnt vehicles, burnt malls, burnt homes, damaged and devastated in the fire and the artillery shelling, the rocket fire, the missile fire, and the destruction that's been caused to people and their homes. The Ukraine army is now coming into this area along with medical services and emergency services. They've recovered some bodies, and while the forensics and the post-mortem teams will carry out their job, but they've taken images. Several of these bodies, according to the Ukraine army, have their hands tied behind them, and they've been shot dead in cold blood in custody. Ukraine government says that this is a war crime and that they will hold Russia accountable for this, and several such bodies are littered on the streets of Bucha as we travel. India Today's team has traveled inside Bucha to get you an assessment of the ground situation nearing day 40 of this battle between Russia and Ukraine. While the Russian forces have retreated from Irpin and Bucha, it's only now that the army, the police, the medical services, the security services, they are entering this area, and this is completely abandoned. Not a soul in sight in this part of Bucha where we are right now. With us is Sasha, and Sasha is a resident of Bucha. Sasha, what happened here?
Так, я весь цей час, поки була війна, я проживала саме в Бучі. У нас є дачний райончик. Я проживалася там. Там, де якраз недалеко проходили ці воєнні дії, коли стріляли, і наші, і їхні. Там дуже багато домівок розгромили, дуже багато. І навіть деякі дома згоріли. Я проживаю там недалеко від Гостомеля. Гостомель взагалі, кажуть, там дуже багато будинків постраждало, дуже багато. Аеропорт також. Нашу мрію вони розгромили. Наша мрія – це наш самоліт, наше достояння українське. Я б сюди прийшла, мені треба просто зв'язь, інтернет. Тут більш ніде нічого не ловить, тільки на цьому місці. Приходиться приходити сюди, дивитися,
The images here are horrifying. This is a residential block, and this has been shelled completely. Virtually every house shattered. People forced to live outside. Right now the temperature here is -2. It's snowing. It was raining a short while back. but people have nowhere to go. There is no electricity, there is no water, there is no gas. In fact, if you just come around, a few families that remain here, they're cooking their food out in the open, and we'll show you how they're surviving in this extreme cold. It's only now that the agencies have reached here, but this family, as you can see, they've got their pots outside and they're cooking a meal for them outside in the open, and yet the lady has a smile on her face in these difficult circumstances. How are you? Are you okay?
Ні, how are you? Ви мене спрашуєте, як звати, правильно я розумію? Люба. А ви мене зрозумієте, мою українську?
What are you making? What are you eating? So there's just some chicken and water. They're boiling it together. That's their only meal, because none of these houses have any power, nowhere to cook inside, no gas, and this cold. And what is actually heartbreaking in these images, we'll just walk. They live here, they eat here, and they've had nowhere else to go. So bad is the situation that Tatya has just buried her child who was killed in shelling right here. And she broke down as she explained that to me, that the child must be very cold inside. So she made a cup of tea, and she's put tea and her child's favorite chocolates on that grave that has been just dug here. And there are other graves that have been dug in this area after the shelling in Bucha. The situation here, extremely heartbreaking. The manner in which these people have survived close to 40 days of an intense Russian attack, and Ukraine armies fight back in this area. The burnt infantry combat vehicle, the burnt tanks and cars on this road and several roads around give you an idea of the kind of battles that have been fought in Bucha in the past 40 days. The Russian soldiers may have retreated, but for every inch of territory there was a fierce battle, with thousands of civilians unfortunately trapped in the crossfire. Now this burnt BMP, burnt infantry combat vehicle here, the burnt Lexus there, the burnt Mercedes behind that, show how pitched battles were fought inside the streets of Bucha. Burnt homes, an indication that civilians were caught in this deadly crossfire that took place in this area. Svetlana, what happened here? What happened in Bucha?
Пока все страшно. Пока все страшно. Пока
Стараемся как-то ожить от того, что здесь происходило. Происходило очень страшное, очень страшное. Даже словами это сложно очень описать. Очень страшно все было. Вы видите, там дома, все разрушено. Пожилым домам полностью гатили и градами, и какими-то этими кассетными бомбами. И, в общем, дом у нас разрушен. Полностью все окна, снаряд прилетел в крышу. Вот. Все очень страшно. У соседей тоже в дом попал снаряд. Вот. Поэтому мы надеемся, мы верим, что наши збройні сили нас захистять. Вот. Так что, как-то так. Спасибо вам.
On the outskirts of Kyiv, en route Bucha, several burnt tanks and armored personal carriers show and indicate the kind of battles that have taken place in this area. Not one, not two, but multiple burnt tanks and APCs in this area. A fierce fight has taken place. The turret completely blown off the tank, the wheels completely destroyed. And this is happening not just in one area, but multiple such locations. If you come close, we'll show you. There's another tank here that lies destroyed. There are other tanks that have been completely destroyed in the attacks that have taken place on the outskirts of Bucha. There are several unexploded shells still lying in this area, and this is the first time as we report this that several agencies are on their way. Just look around, government agencies are now on their way to Bucha to provide relief and help to those impacted by these battles. Whether it's the army that was holding ground here or emergency services who are now making their way in an attempt to bring back those who were trapped in the past 40 days of these fierce tank battles that took place in and around Irpin and Bucha on the outskirts of Kyiv in Ukraine. So after more than a month of intense shelling, Galina from Bucha is finally leaving on her cycle. How did you survive for 1 month, Galina?
I will live in a deep... А можно сказать по-русски? Bunker, yes, we live in a deep bunker, and 3 weeks we sleep like gypsy.
Like gypsy, did you have food? Did you have water?
A little bit, but we survive. It's okay. Russian people not so nervous.
I can understand. She is nervous. I mean, imagine more than 3 weeks living in a bunker. Now she's leaving on a cycle.
It's my cycle.
It's your cycle, and with very bare.
It's my stuff, because I leave this apartment and I go now in my house.
So, how scared were you? What was it like when there was like boom, boom, shelling?
Boom, boom near my house, 3 meters.
Emergency vehicles, they're leaving in a rush, and soldiers are leaving this place. So you can imagine what life is like. It's snowing. It's very cold.
Yes. Too much tank go BMP. I don't know.
Yes.
Very big.
Yeah. So these were the kind of battles that were fought here. You stay safe, Galina from Bucha. The stench of rotting flesh, burnt bodies. This car, for example, as you can make out, an explosion took place very close by. There are shrapnel marks all over, and the shrapnel has also pierced the windscreen and killed those inside. A family, you can see bodies still inside this car after so many days. Devastated, lying on the road. A man, a woman, a child, and there are bodies that are also lying on the roadside, those who were killed in the shelling in this area. And this place in Bucha perhaps witnessed very bad, very intense fighting and shelling from both sides. Russia trying to move towards Kiev, the Ukrainian army trying to stall the advance, and the battlefield was here in Irpin and in Bucha. But today, finally, when agencies have come here after the Russians retreated towards Belarus and the Ukrainian forces have taken control of this area, it's only now that medical services are arriving here to retrieve these bodies, and there are a number of them lying on the roadside, in front of buildings, in ditches. The Ukrainian army says some of them have their hands tied behind them and they were killed in cold blood. Some others killed in shelling. With cameraman Lalit Mohan Joshi in Bucha, Ukraine, Gaurav Sawant for India Today.
The world is in absolute shock over what allegedly transpired in Bucha as the Russian forces retreated. With bodies piling up on the roads, the images coming from that town where India Today's Gaurav Sawant and Lalit Joshi are currently reporting is beyond horrifying. Putin's war machine has wreaked havoc in this suburb of the Ukrainian capital, but Russia denies all allegations of war crimes. They say that why is it only now, when they've retreated, that these bodies are becoming apparent? Connectivity was never lost. The mayor of Bucha was in the city. So why is it only now, after the Russians have retreated, that these images are somehow becoming apparent? That's what Russia says while denying these very visible war crimes. Take a look. Bodies lying everywhere on the streets. Makeshift mass graves with bodies in plastic wrapping. Evidence of mass murder, allegations of torture and rape. This is devastated Bucha after Russian troops withdrew from areas around Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. With bodies piled up on the streets, these blood-curdling images of the massacre have stunned the world. Residents narrate the nightmare about their neighbors being shot in cold blood without any provocation. India Today's Gaurav Sawant, the only Indian reporter on the ground in Bucha, just minutes after the Russian withdrawal. Ukrainian forces fear many of the bodies may have been booby-trapped.
Presidents do not usually write down addresses like this. But today, I have to say just that. To talk about the discoveries in Bucha and other cities from where the occupiers were expelled. Hundreds of people tortured, killed, and civilians executed. Bodies on the street. Booby-trapped areas. Even the bodies of the dead are booby-trapped. Widespread aftermath of looting. Concentrated evil has visited our land. The killers, executioners, rapists, murderers who call themselves an army and who deserve only death after what they have done.
European media reports suggest that Russian forces used children of Bucha as human shields, adding to the horrendous charges of war crimes. Charges that Russia has vehemently denied, putting it out to Ukrainian propaganda. With rotten bodies on the streets and mass destruction, civilians are unable to reach cemeteries to bury the bodies of loved ones.
They live here, they eat here, and they've had nowhere else to go. So bad is the situation that Tatya has just buried her child who was killed in shelling right here. And she broke down as she explained that to me, that the child must be very cold inside. So she made a cup of tea and she's put tea and her child's favorite chocolates on that grave that has been just dug here. And there are other graves that have been dug in this area after the shelling in Bucha.
India Today's Gaurav witnessed the immediate aftermath of the killings.
As security forces now make inroads into Irpin and Bucha, as emergency vehicles, firefighters, hospital vehicles and even hearse vans get to Irpin and Bucha, the real extent of death, damage and destruction is becoming apparent. This building perhaps just symbolic of the losses that have been suffered in the past 40 days of the Russia-Ukraine war.
Several Russian rockets hit Bucha's once famous shopping malls and centers in the heart of the city.
The Ukraine army is now coming into this area along with medical services and emergency services. They've recovered some bodies, and while the forensics and the post-mortem teams will carry out their job, but they've taken images. Several of these bodies, according to the Ukraine army, have their hands tied behind them and they've been shot dead in cold blood in custody. Ukraine government says that this is a war crime and that they will hold Russia accountable.
Images of charred Russian armored vehicles and tanks strewn on the streets have also surfaced, showing the ferocity of the Ukrainian resistance against the invading Russian forces.
This tank here and multiple tanks like this are littered on this road where both Russian and Ukrainian armor have been destroyed and targeted. The Ukrainians, they very clearly say that most of these people were either killed in battle, some captured and some fled towards their camps. Worse or more devastating are reports of loss of civilian lives, often as the Ukrainians insist that they were caught, captured and then killed in this battle.
The killing of defenseless civilians in Bucha has become a new image of the horrors of the war in Ukraine. With Gaurav Sawant in Bucha, Ukraine, Bureau Report, India Today. And with me live from Kyiv is Gaurav Sawant, one of the few international reporters to get a first-hand view of what happened in Bucha. Gaurav, remember, has been visiting Bucha for the last 40 days since he arrived. Since he arrived in Ukraine, Gaurav has been visiting Bucha, which is just outside Kyiv, repeatedly. He's been going there. He's been seeing what the city was like before the attacks actually happened. And he's gone there now after the damage has been done and the Russians have retreated. Gaurav, your reports are going viral, not just here in India, but all across the world. And they tell a truly terrifying story that Bucha may so far be the most horrific thing that has happened in Ukraine, at least from what's visible.
Shiv, at least from what's in public domain as of now, when we visited Bucha yesterday and today, the situation is alarming. It's extremely grim. It's horrifying to see bodies on either side of the road, often in the middle of the road. We visited a mall and there were bodies just lying around in the mall, and we filmed that on camera. There are bodies on the road. There was this place right in the middle of the highway that leads into Bucha. There were 4 bodies inside a car, a couple and perhaps their children. A shell had landed, the windscreen was smashed, and their bodies perhaps decomposed. They must have been lying there for so many days. We moved to a residential locality and we spoke to, Katrina, that grandmother, Tatya, the lady with her, Victor, the man, Shiv, an entire building shelled. Intense crossfire, missile attacks, artillery attacks, armor attacks, rocket attacks, and that building was shelled. A young child was killed, and they couldn't take the child to a cemetery to bury her because of the intense shelling that continued for weeks. So they buried the child right next to their house, and it was so heartbreaking for that family. Every morning they would go there with a cup of milk and some chocolates for that buried child. So these were heartbreaking stories in Bucha, and this is what we saw. What we heard is even more horrifying. Information about residents of Bucha, civilians, non-combatants being arrested, tortured and killed. Now, President Zelensky of Ukraine has asked for an international investigation. There are teams of forensics that have reached Bucha. As we were leaving Bucha, there were teams of those who were to conduct a post-mortem, those who were to conduct forensic analysis and prepare a report which Ukraine wants to take internationally and tell the world what happened here. And every day as we speak to people, we hear more horrifying tales of torture, intimidation, death and killings that took place in and around Bucha, Shiv.
Gaurav, have the Russians, retreated completely from that area, or is it still under threat? How far from Bucha are attacks still taking place?
Shiv, the information that we were given by the Ukrainian army, and we spoke to some very senior army officers on ground in Bucha, they said that they had almost reached the Belarus border. The Ukrainian army had reached the Belarus border because the Russians had almost completely retreated. They're not sure if there are pockets of resistance, and that is why they're moving forward very cautiously as of now. Shiv, but what's extremely worrying, while the Russians may have retreated towards the Belarus border from Irpin and Bucha, there are a lot of unexploded cargo, and that's a cause for grave concern. Unexploded rockets, unexploded ammunition in buildings, on the road, on the roadside, like that mall that we were visiting. There were many such rockets and bomblets that were buried, partially buried, out in the open. Anti-tank mines lying on the road. When we were entering Bucha, it was an absolute nightmare that and since we were driving ourselves, you have to be very careful that you don't drive on top of an anti-tank mine or an anti-personnel mine. And there's so much debris on the road, so many bodies on the road that we filmed and put on India Today television. So even though the Russians may have retreated to the Belarus border, regrouping perhaps to attack from the Luhansk and the Donetsk, the Donbass region, the situation here remains grim, and that is why curfew will remain in place in Irpin and Bucha till the time bomb disposal teams can sanitize the area for people to start moving back, perhaps in the next 48 to 72 hours, Shiv.
Gaurav, stay safe and incredible reporting from that truly horrifying image in Bucha, which is just outside of Kyiv. It's so difficult to imagine, but important to remind our viewers that Bucha is a suburb of Kyiv. It's like any suburb of any big city. So you can only imagine seeing the scenes that Gaurav has witnessed and brought to you, the viewer, firsthand here on India Today. Gaurav, stay safe. We'll keep coming back to you. Gaurav, the only journalist reporting from that war zone in Bucha. He and his camera person, Lalit Joshi, captured those unprecedented scenes of that horror on the streets of Bucha. Here's what Gaurav said. While he was speaking to us just now, he was also sending us this fresh ground report that he had recorded just before he came live. Take a look at this.
On day 40 of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, more images emerge of the death, destruction and devastation that took place in Irpin and Bucha for the protection or the capture of Kyiv. Now this is a burnt Russian tank, remains of a burnt Russian tank. The V sign, as you see on the barrel in front, is a clear indication, as Russian tanks use two signs. They either use a V or a Z or a Z. The tank completely shattered and destroyed. It's the gun and the turret, they just lie some distance away, buried in sand, an indication of the kind of impact that took place. And this tank is completely charred, burnt. What Ukrainian army personnel tell us that this was targeted using a Javelin anti-tank guided missile. Again, the V sign very clear. This area is barely 50 kilometers from Kiev, and pitched battles were fought by the Russians to move forward and the Ukrainians to stall the advance of the Russians. This tank here and multiple tanks like this are littered on this road where both Russian and Ukrainian armor have been destroyed and targeted. The Ukrainians, they very clearly say that most of these people were either killed in battle, some captured and some fled towards their camps. Worse or more devastating are reports of loss of civilian lives, often as the Ukrainians insist that they were caught, captured and then killed in this battle. With cameraman Lalit Mohan Joshi, en route Irpin and Bucha, Gaurav Sawant in Ukraine for India Today.
So those are the horrific remnants of what's happening in Bucha right outside Kyiv. But what is the current status as far as the Russian occupation of Ukraine is concerned? Where are they? Where are they not? Where have they moved out from? Which parts are still under Russian control, etc. All of those are, of course, dynamic questions. So here's a live, fresh, refreshed look at where things are at right now. Now, these are the blue areas are places which used to be under Russian control, which have been taken back. As you can see, this is the larger Kyiv area between Kyiv and Chernihiv, where things have been taken back under control. The areas in pink are areas where there is fighting going on between the Russian and the Ukrainian forces. But remember, very important to remember that the eastern part of Ukraine is what Putin says is Russia's real military objective. And when it comes to that, it looks like Russia has been able to completely encircle Ukraine across all its borders. From the eastern area to the border near Kharkiv to the entire Donbas region, down to Mariupol, which has fallen into Russian hands, and of course the area very close to Kherson, which was the first city to fall into Russian hands, and the Crimean Peninsula. This entire encirclement has been totally achieved, and it's painted red to represent the Russian control in that area. Some pockets here have been, have fallen back into Ukrainian control, especially down in the south. Small little pockets have come back to Ukrainian control. The outskirts of Kharkiv have come back to Ukrainian control. But this big swath of red in the eastern part of the country tells you a pretty grim picture for Ukraine as far as the eastern part of that country is concerned. Now, the images from Bucha continue to stream in. They're absolutely horrific. The world's attention has been riveted once again to Ukraine on day 40. The mayor of that city, Anatoly Fedoruk, has said that 300 residents have been killed during a month-long occupation by the Russian army in Bucha. Victims who were not in mass graves are still lying on the streets, and our cameras saw some of them. Watch this report.